Rolex, with its origins in the century-long history of fine watchmaking that began in the 1900s, has been one of the world's largest manufacturers of high-quality timepieces since the year 1905. For those who aren't particularly knowledgeable about watches, a Rolex is considered the epitome of luxury. It was established in London under the name Wilsdorf and Davis by 24-year-old Hans Wilsdorf and his brother-in-law Alfred Davis. Today, the mammoth firm is valued at a staggering $8.35 billion. The brand is perhaps the most prominent watch brand in the world, and its wearers include a daunting list of legendary figures. Many of the world's most renowned men, from athletes to movie stars to politicians, have been photographed wearing Rolex watches. The list includes Barack Obama, Warren Buffett, John F. Kennedy, Paul Newman, Winston Churchill, Steve McQueen, Martin Luther King, Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, and Jay-Z, just to name a few. Looking at the successful company's name, it's clear that Rolex was not derived from the watchmaker's surname. Rather, it was the result of a very strange and supernatural occurrence. Wilsdorf claimed that the idea for Rolex occurred to him on a horse-drawn bus when a supposed genie whispered Rolex in his ear. It was the perfect title that he needed, and it was short and easily learnable in any language. From its very inception, the luxury watch brand has submitted over 500 patents. It makes sense since almost 2,000 people are employed for the production and assembly of motions alone. The company also has several research and development departments that work on things like new watches, more efficient manufacturing, and testing. Welcome to our YouTube channel, and join us as we chronicle the history of the world's best-known watch brand from its inception to its present-day glory. But first, let's start with an introduction to the man behind the revolutionary watch brand. Hans Wilsdorf, the orphan who founded Rolex. Hans Wilsdorf was not just a visionary businessman who changed the world with inventions like the first waterproof watch. He was a kind person whose long-lasting acts of charity have left a mark that goes far beyond making watches. His childhood was filled with constant struggle and conflict, but his life has been one whose narrative, to say the least, is extremely motivating and inspiring. The genius entrepreneur was born into a prosperous family of iron merchants in Bavaria, Germany in 1881. Unfortunately, at the tender age of 12, tragic circumstances left young Hans an orphan, and his custody was given to his aunt and uncle, who promptly enrolled him in a boarding school in Coburg, Germany. At school, the young chap dedicated himself entirely to his studies and became proficient in the English language. Hans Wilsdorf's fluency in 3 languages, German, French, and English, was a key asset in his career, and his general love of language would go on to play a significant role in his company's international success. While still in boarding school, he decided that he'd had enough of school and relocated to Geneva, Switzerland. In Geneva, he found work with a pearl dealer and subsequently joined their staff. As he learned more about the company, he was surprised to see that even though it did not manufacture anything, it generated a sizable amount of income. The company basically bought pearls from many different markets and then just graded, cleaned, and packaged them to be sold to jewelers. Just like his multilingual skills, this job experience would also prove extremely valuable for young Hans in the future. In 1900, the knowledge-hungry Hans secured a position with the expanding Swiss watchmaker named Kuno Korten. Given his fluency in English, he was chosen specifically to handle mail from the world's 2 wealthiest countries at the time, the British Empire and the United States. While working at Kuno Korten, he developed a fascination for watch movement and their precision. This was the start of what would be Hans Wilsdorf's life's work. Another very important event in his life was meeting the Swiss watchmaker Egler, who created ébauches, which were unfinished base movement with lever escapements that made them suitable for wristwatches. Hans, with his exceptional foresight, noticed how people were moving away from using pocket watches, and with this knowledge in mind, he thought of starting a new range of timepieces. In 1905, he partnered with his brother-in-law, Alfred James Davis, to form the firm Wilsdorf and Davis. Their business was focused on supplying the entire British Empire with high-quality timepieces, both pocket and wrist. However, a problem that lay with wristwatches was that in those days a wristwatch was regarded as a joke. As Hans Wilsdorf writes in 1948's The Story of Rolex, very few people wore them, and those that did were made fun of. People believed a watch with such a little, delicate mechanism couldn't stand up to the wear and tear of a person's fists and punches, he said. And these watches were also thought to be too tiny to be precise. In spite of all the opposition, he persisted with his plan to make wristwatches the standard means of personal timekeeping, replacing pocket watches. In Switzerland, he gave Egler the largest order for wristwatches ever booked at the time, and the new timepieces that got released were a huge commercial success. After just 3 years, Wilsdorf and Davis had established themselves as major players in the British watch trade. Realizing that they needed a brand name that appeared sophisticated and authoritative when displayed on their famed wristwatches, the two men came up with the trade name Rolex and first registered it in 1908. In 1910, his prestigious watches garnered international attention as Rolex wristwatches became the first ever to get the Swiss certificate of chronometric precision. The Oyster. Rolex's popularity continued to soar over the years globally, but in 1919, Hans decided to move the company from the United Kingdom to Geneva, Switzerland, to avoid paying taxes on the Swiss movements used in their watches. He opened a Rolex office in Geneva as the sole proprietor, and in 1920, Montrez Rolex SA was officially incorporated in Switzerland. The company successfully moved its headquarters from London, England to Geneva, Switzerland. Hans, now freed from the burden of high production expenses, set out to address the issue of dust and moisture getting into the watch case and harming the mechanism. In 1926, Rolex debuted a new level of distinction and called it the Oyster, a watch case that was completely waterproof and had been developed by the company's engineers and designers under his direction. Some customers in the 1920s who were used to keeping their timepieces dry in all weather were dubious of this screwed-together invention. To successfully persuade the general public that the Oyster case was, in fact, waterproof, it would require some particularly brilliant marketing. So the next year, the master marketer supplied Mercedes Gleitz with a Rolex Oyster watch for her attempt to swim the English Channel. The Rolex Oyster watch made the front page of the Daily Mail after withstanding nearly 10 hours of submersion in water and was announced the greatest triumph in watchmaking by Rolex. The first ever self-winding watch. In 1931, Rolex invented a self-winding watch mechanism called the perpetual rotor. This was the company's next big step forward. People were fascinated by the ingenuity of a self-winding movement, in which when the watch was worn on the wrist, the rotor automatically wound the watch smoothly and softly. The waterproof Oyster case and the automatic perpetual movement came together to make another masterpiece called the Oyster Perpetual, which is still at the heart of almost every Rolex watch that comes out of the factory today. The Oyster's performance in the hands of Mercedes Gleitz inspired Hans to seek out similarly high-profile opportunities to test Rolex timepieces in extreme environments. Clients received their watches at no cost, and in exchange they supplied helpful feedback that helped him improve the watch's form and function. In 1933, the first expedition to fly over Everest was equipped with Rolex Oyster watches, as was the British racing motorist Sir Malcolm Campbell when he established a land speed record of almost 300 miles per hour. Following the end of World War II, Hans also honored the era's notable figures by presenting them with one-of-a-kind Rolex watches. General Henri Guisan, who served as the Chief of Staff of the Swiss Army during World War II, was awarded the 50,000th Rolex to be officially certified as a Swiss chronometer in 1946. Winston Churchill, who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for the majority of World War II, was presented with the 100,000th Rolex chronometer, a rose gold date just in the year 1948. The fabulous Rolex watches. The decade of the 1950s was marked by the rapid expansion of Rolex's catalog with the introduction of a plethora of new models that were built to serve as tools. Hans provided the 1953 British Mount Everest expedition with timepieces, and later that year, in recognition of Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary's accomplishment of being the first men on record to reach the peak of Mount Everest, he introduced the Rolex Explorer watch as a way to pay tribute to their accomplishment. Additionally, the year 1953 marked the introduction of the Submariner, which was the first watch of its kind designed specifically for use by scuba and skin divers of the time. In 1955, Rolex introduced the GMT Master, a watch originally designed for Pan American pilots to monitor 2 time zones. It released 2 significant timepieces in 1956, the anti-magnetic Milgauss for the scientific community and the ultra-luxurious Day-Date President for the world's most influential people. Hans's marketing of these famous watches from the 1950s and 1960s put Rolex at the top of the watchmaking food chain, the legacy of the philanthropic Hans Wilsdorf. Over the course of more than a century, Rolex has been able to produce revolutionary watches, all the while developing new techniques and constantly pushing the envelope. Hans Wilsdorf was a remarkable businessman and creative genius who refused to do things the same way they had always been done, simply because that was the way that they had been done before. Instead, he persisted in pushing the boundaries of watchmaking, commerce, and marketing. But the year 1944 was a hard one for Hans as it marked the death of his beloved wife Florence. He established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation and turned over his entire ownership position in Rolex to the foundation. To this date, the company remains to be owned and operated by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which secretly gives away a significant percentage of its profits to support a variety of philanthropic organizations. Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960, but his legacy lives on in the watches made by his company that is known and coveted all over the world.